The entire NFL community has it wrong when it comes to discussing the 2025 quarterback class. While it's not the 24 class, it most definitely is not the god-awful 22 class and actually has some pretty impressive talent. This was originally going to be just more of an open discussion, but after how much I actually ended up enjoying this class, I felt it would be better to discuss the 9 NFL quality quarterbacks I see in this class. Before we get into it, I just want to throw up the key on screen to remind you guys of how these grades work, although the safe part of the B grade does not apply to quarterbacks. That said, let's get right into it. So my 9th best QB in this class is Quinn Ewers. While he has impressive accuracy in the short and intermediate game, and just an overall strong ability to play within an offense, he lacks any real traits. His ball has absolutely no velocity on it unless he truly sits on a throw and focuses in putting some spin on the ball. He lacks any athletic upside and also just has really poor pocket presence. I think he can be a quality backup in a system that emphasizes the quick game, like the 49ers or the Dolphins, or any teams looking for a stopgap QB with some potential, like maybe the Rams. But with a D prospect grade, I wouldn't be interested in looking his way until later into day 3. At 8, a guy who I expected to be a lot higher on this list, and that's Will Howard of Ohio State. He absolutely balled out in the playoffs and packs on a 6'4", 235-pound frame that allows him to break sacks and pick up extra yardage on the ground, where he is surprisingly good in the designed run game. Howard is looking to push the ball downfield every single play, for better and for worse. He's capable of making impressive throws on the run. However, he doesn't scramble much as his eyes are usually glued to his first read and again trying to send it downfield as opposed to watching his pocket and pass rush. His accuracy is also very inconsistent, and as a 24-year-old, he feels like a finished product. Still, his impressive traits make him an interesting high upside backup for teams like the Browns, Jaguars, and Jets to take a shot on him, and he gets a C- grade from me. On the complete opposite end of the spectrum is Dillon Gabriel of Oregon. He almost got his own solo video after they beat Ohio State in the regular season, where he threw for 341 yards and 2 touchdowns, as well as running one in during the winning effort. Gabriel has a great processor that comes from 5 full starting seasons and over 2,000 pass attempts in his collegiate career. He gets the ball out very quickly and avoids sacks and turnovers almost completely. At 5'10", he is very capable of hitting the middle of the field, and he does so through pre-snap reads and anticipation. This has led to some bad-looking interceptions where he just gets it wrong, and with a general lack of athleticism, that's just going to be part of his game. My concern for Gabriel is the combination of incredibly small size and his very poor pocket feel, which could result in early stages Bryce Young levels of failure. With his traits, his ceiling is an above-average QB, but I see him more as a solid starter and an elite backup like a Gardner Minshew. With a C grade for me, I think the Seahawks and Falcons are teams that should look into drafting Gabriel. So closing out this tier of guys who aren't going to be drafted and seen as the answer, but I still think can be quality NFL players, we got to talk about Kyle McCord. McCord is a completely different player than he was a year ago, and while part of that is probably weaker competition, he also just became a quarterback who's accurate at all 3 levels and has a great feel for ball placement. He's also a pretty talented play extender despite limited athleticism. At 22 years old and coming off of a massive improvement season, he's worth a 3rd or 4th round pick with a C+ grade for teams like the Rams and Saints who aren't necessarily looking for the next franchise guy yet, but can use a guy who can keep them competitive and also still have some potential. Okay, now I want to preface this with the fact that the gap between 5 and 6 is bigger than the gap between 2 and 5 before I unveil my number 5 guy. And it's going to be Jalen Milroe. Now yes, Milroe is very much a my guy. I made the video on him before Alabama collapsed mid-season. And to be honest, everything good I said about him in that video still holds true. He is the best designed quarterback runner I have ever scouted, with the combo of elite speed, which he just ran a 4.37 today at his pro day as I'm recording this. That was unofficial. I don't know if they've clocked the official time yet. He has elite agility, strength, and vision, as well as elusiveness. He does throw the ball with some great zip, and he has an even bigger arm than I gave him credit for. He does play well within structure, and he pushes the ball downfield. He is the prototype for a spread offense QB, and he thrives in high pressure moments. All that said, he has some serious accuracy issues, especially in the short and intermediate game, and his tiny hands cause him to sometimes lose grip of the ball and not be able to send it as far as he wants to, as well as forcing him to lose 24 fumbles in 2 seasons. His processing is also pretty underwhelming, but much like Jalen Hurts, I think you get this guy with a Kellen Moore, a Kevin Stefanski, the duo of Pete Carroll and Chip Kelly. You let Jalen sit and allow these coaches to mold him, and I think Jalen can be incredibly successful in this league. He gets a B grade for me, and I like a team picking him up in the second round, although I think he's going to end up falling a bit further. Now, for what is probably my hottest take of this draft cycle, and one I'm not really going to back down from despite me trying to force myself to. And admittedly, cost probably has a role to play into this, but I have Shedeur Sanders here at 4. Now, before the pitchforks come out, I want to discuss what I like about Shedeur first. He reads defenses well pre-snap and gets the ball out quickly. He's accurate, he's got great ball placement, a lightning quick release. He's never had a touchdown-interception ratio worse than 3.7, and that's in 4 years as a starter. He keeps his eyes on his receivers at all times, and best of all, his poise and lack of fear is what drives him as a quarterback. But his traits are pretty average in terms of arm talent and athleticism. He thinks a lot more highly of himself than is true, which leads to tight window interceptions and some horrible sacks where he just refuses to give up on plays, but simply does not have the athleticism to get away from these edge rushers. His pocket presence is just okay, and while he makes good pre-snap reads, multiple fronts just really confuse and bottle him up. But the worst thing I can say about Shedeur is that he's not as accurate as we've been led to believe. I mean, there's just times where he sails easy passes, and sometimes they still get caught, sometimes they don't. But for a guy who really lacks ceiling, his accuracy isn't where you'd want it to be. While so much about Shedeur tells me no, his elite poise, his command of the offense, his still impressive accuracy, and the competitive fire that he brings day in and day out make me think he's just gonna figure it out. And he reminds me a lot of Kirk Cousins in that sense. As a guy who doesn't have the world going for him, but as a leader, an accurate passer, and as a guy who just wants it, makes a career for himself. I also think as a day one starter, Shedeur is probably the highest floor and would be the best guy immediately. It's between him and the number 1 QB. So I understand why the Giants and Browns, who need that day one production, are interested in taking him inside the top 3. But I'd like it a lot more at the top of the second round. But no player is going to fall further in the real draft compared to my rankings as my number 3 quarterback, Tyler Shough. Tyler was the final QB I watched, and my God was I stunned with what I saw. I mean, at 6'4", 225, this guy is the most accurate QB in the draft at all 3 levels, and I don't think it's close. On top of that, he thrives when extending plays, he's great at getting out of the pocket, manipulating defenders with his eyes and feet, and making great things happen downfield. Now, he is a little over-reliant on that ability, as a lot of times he's just a one-read and run guy, although I do think a lot of that was scheme. He's really great at beating blitz calls, but when pressure does get through, he absolutely folds. His completion rate drops by 30%. He has the double-edged sword of playing 7 years across 3 systems, so while he's up there in age, he's ready to go day one as a starter. But the biggest issue, and the reason he probably won't go to the 4th, 5th, 6th, and maybe even 7th round, is his horrible injury concerns. Without getting too much into it, there are legitimate reports that teams do not even have him on their boards because they are so concerned about his history, and his slender frame isn't doing those concerns any favors. But man, he just so overwhelmingly passes the eye test and looks like an NFL quarterback out there. And for teams like the Seahawks, Jets, Browns, Titans if they don't go Ward at 1, what the hell do you have to lose? And beyond those teams, every single team in the NFL that isn't sure they have their guy for the next 8 years, why the hell are you not taking a shot on this guy? I truly don't understand. KC, Buffalo, Cincinnati, Baltimore, Philly, the Chargers, Washington, Carolina, Houston, Green Bay, and any team that drafted a first-round QB last year. If you do not fall into that list, then you have zero reason not to use a day 3 pick on this guy who very realistically can be a franchise QB. It's not often a potential face of the franchise guy falls this late in the draft, so go out and get him. I see a lot of CJ Stroud from Shough, and he earns a B+ grade for me, a grade that would have been higher without the injury worries. Now moving on to my number 2 QB, I have Jaxson Dart out of Ole Miss. At 6'2", 225, he's got a nice frame, and when he connects, he has one of the most beautiful deep balls you'll ever see. His release allows him to fit balls into any window, versus pressure, and just overall, he has great ball placement at all 3 levels. He's also a capable rusher who's willing to put his body on the line to move the chains or cross the pylon. He has a lot of work to do with all the mental aspects of football, and his deep ball accuracy can be sporadic when sending it 40+ yards downfield. Despite his flaws, I see him as a great prospect, earning a B+ grade as a guy who needs to sit for at least 1 year, but I view him as a franchise QB with a lot of similarities to Sam Darnold, including the great, the bad, and the ugly. Teams like the Steelers, Rams, Giants, and Colts should look at Dart as a guy who can sit behind their current starters and mold into the franchise guy. Especially the Colts and Steelers, who have been stuck in mediocrity and won't get many chances at a QB with these elite traits. But to the surprise of nobody, my number 1 QB is Miami's Cam Ward. At 6'2", 225, the thing that separates Cam Ward from this entire class is his absolute elite pocket presence that he pairs with being an elite play extender, despite not really being that impressive of an athlete. Now, he's not a bad athlete at all, but what he does out of the pocket is really just all awareness and feel for the game rather than running around guys. His release and overall mechanics are all great, and so are his processor and pre-snap reads. He throws into a lot of tight windows, which opens the field to him to more than most QBs, although a solid amount of those do not go his way, and I imagine that will be amplified in the NFL. His accuracy and overall arm talent are very good, but not elite. But I really don't have anything bad to say about Cam Ward, outside of a potential turnover problem in the pros. When I watch Cam Ward, I'm reminded so much of Deshaun Watson when he was with the Texans and not a scumbag. It's easy to forget now with everything that's happened, but for a few years, Deshaun had really solidified himself, at least in my eyes, as clearly a top 4 quarterback in the league, along with Mahomes, Brady, and Rodgers, and for my money, he was the number 2 guy. While I don't see Cam ever being a top 5 QB, I think the chances for him busting are so low, and any of the top 3 teams would be lucky to have him, although at this point, I think it couldn't be more clear that Tennessee is going to take him. That's all for this one. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. Let me know your thoughts down below. I'd love to have the discussion with you. And until next time,
I'm a rock star, I can't help it, even on trap beats. I'm so high, take a whole, not a half beat.